of the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA. The AfCFTA is a landmark agreement designed to create the world's largest free trade area by connecting 54 African nations. By removing tariffs and trade barriers, the AfCFTA aims to boost intra-African trade by over 50%, unlocking new investment opportunities and driving economic growth. However, to fully unlock these benefits, the AfCFTA requires enhanced infrastructure, stronger digital trade systems, and regional value chains that promote Africa's industrialization.
Africa's new $3 trillion economy has just shattered U.S. dominance. For decades, the United States, Wall Street, and the IMF dictated how Africa could trade, what Africa could produce, and even how African nations could use their own resources. But today, something historic has happened. Africa has united over 1.4 billion people into one single market, creating the largest free trade zone on Earth, the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. This is not just a policy shift. This is an earthquake in global economics. And the aftershocks are being felt in Washington, in Wall Street, in Paris, and across every Western capital that once believed Africa would never rise. So, let's dive deep into how Africa's $3 trillion economy was born, why it's breaking U.S. dominance, and why experts believe this could mark the beginning of the end of American global economic power. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, officially began in January 2021. But while the signatures were made years ago, the real story is what's happening now. Nations are actively implementing it, tariffs are being removed, and borders that once separated trade are being opened. For the first time in modern history, Africa is building a continental market instead of being divided into small, fragmented economies. 54 out of 55 African nations have signed the agreement. It covers a population of 1.4 billion people. The combined GDP is already $3 trillion and is expected to grow to $16 trillion by 2050. Think about that. By 2050, Africa's economy will rival or even surpass that of the United States. And this is not a fantasy. It's already happening. What makes AfCFTA so powerful is that it is not just about trade. It's about rewriting the rules of Africa's economy. For decades, Africa exported raw materials cheaply: gold, cocoa, oil, lithium, and cobalt, while importing expensive finished goods. The West grew rich. Africa stayed poor. But with AfCFTA, the cycle is being broken. Africa is now trading with itself, processing its own resources, and building regional value chains. This is the foundation of the new $3 trillion African economy. To understand why this is revolutionary, we need to remember how Africa's economy was set up. Colonial powers designed African economies to serve Europe and, later, America. Roads, ports, and railways were built not to connect African nations, but to move resources from mines and plantations straight to ships bound for Europe. Even after independence, the system continued. African nations often exported raw materials to Western markets while importing finished products back at inflated prices. This was not trade. This was extraction. For example, Ghana and Ivory Coast together produce 70% of the world's cocoa, yet most of the chocolate industry's $150 billion revenue goes to Europe and America. Nigeria and Angola export oil, but rely on imported fuel because their refining capacity was deliberately kept underdeveloped. Congo has the world's richest cobalt reserves, critical for smartphones and electric cars. Yet most of the profits flow to Western companies. AfCFTA flips this colonial script. Instead of Ghana sending cocoa to Europe, Ghana can now trade freely with Nigeria, which has processing capacity. Instead of Congo exporting raw cobalt to China or the U.S., it can collaborate with South Africa to build battery industries inside Africa. This is Africa building industries for itself, not for colonial masters. Now, here's where the story gets explosive. The United States has always seen Africa as a supplier of resources and a consumer of American exports. Washington has used trade agreements like AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, to shape African economies to favor U.S. interests. But AfCFTA changes everything. With a unified African market, U.S. U.S. exports face tough competition. Why would Nigeria import American rice if it can buy cheaper rice from within Africa? Why would Kenya import U.S. made cars if Ghana is building automobile assembly plants with Toyota, Volkswagen, and local firms? Already, we're seeing the numbers shift. Africa's intratrade is projected to grow by over 50% within the next decade. U.S. trade with Africa has dropped by 35% in the last 10 years. China, the EU, and now Africa itself are taking over markets that used to belong to America. For the first time, America is being squeezed out of Africa. And U.S. companies know this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has already warned that AfCFTA could cut billions of dollars in American exports. Washington is worried. Wall Street is worried. But Africa? Africa is celebrating. Let's talk about food. Africa holds 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Yet for decades, Africa has been importing food from the United States and Europe. This dependence has been a weapon. The West used food aid as leverage to dictate policies. But AfCFTA is changing that. African nations are now investing heavily in agriculture and agribusiness. Nigeria has doubled rice production in the past decade. Ethiopia has become one of the world's top coffee exporters. Ghana and Ivory Coast are demanding higher cocoa prices by controlling global supply. The African Development Bank projects that by 2030, Africa's agriculture market will be worth $1 trillion. That means Africa will not just feed itself, it will feed the world. And every ton of African rice, maize, or cocoa that is grown and sold inside Africa is one less sale for American farmers. That's why U.S. agribusiness lobbies are warning Congress about losing Africa. For Washington, this is a nightmare. For Africa, it is liberation. Another shocking reality is investment flows. In the past, African nations depended on loans from the IMF and World Bank, institutions controlled by Washington. Those loans came with heavy conditions: privatize your industries, cut subsidies, open your markets to Western corporations. But today, Africa has options. China has invested over $150 billion into African infrastructure. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar are pouring billions into African ports, airlines, and logistics. Even African billionaires are building homegrown industries, from Aliko Dangote's $20 billion oil refinery to tech unicorns in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. Meanwhile, U.S. investment in Africa is declining. Why? Because Washington still treats Africa as a place for charity and aid, not as a strategic partner. With AfCFTA, investors now see Africa as one giant, unified $3 trillion market. This is not just 54 small economies anymore. This is one mega economy. And that's why money is moving east and south away from the U.S. Here's the most dangerous part for Washington: the U.S. dollar. The dollar is powerful because most of the world trades in it. But now, Africa, united under AfCFTA and strengthened by BRICS alliances, is beginning to trade differently. Nigeria and South Africa have discussed trade in local currencies. BRICS is pushing for alternatives to the dollar. Africa holds *40% of the world's gold reserves and 30% of critical minerals, meaning it has real leverage to back its currencies. If even a fraction of Africa's $3 trillion trade shifts away from the dollar, the impact on U.S. financial dominance is massive. Remember, the strength of the dollar is built on demand. If Africa stops demanding it, the dollar weakens. And if the dollar weakens, so does American global power. For decades, the West controlled Africa through three tools. 1. Trade dependency. 2. Debt dependency. 3. Currency dependency. AfCFTA breaks all three. Trade is now intra-African. Debt can be sourced from China, BRICS, or even African development banks. Currency is shifting toward local systems and alternatives. And this terrifies Washington. It means America no longer has the ability to control African policy through aid or loans. In fact, African leaders are now openly rejecting IMF conditions, Western interference, and colonial-style exploitation. This is why we are seeing coups in West Africa that throw out French and Western influence. The AfCFTA is not just economics. It is political liberation. What does this all mean for the world? It means the era of U.S. dominance is ending. The rise of AfCFTA the strengthening of BRICS, and the shift of global trade toward Asia and Africa are creating a multipolar world. In this new world, the U.S. is no longer the global empire. It's just one player among many. For Africa, this is a chance to finally control its destiny, to unite its people, its resources, and its markets into one unstoppable force. By 2050, Africa will be home to 2.5 billion people, the largest workforce on Earth. With AfCFTA, that workforce will not just be cheap labor for Western companies. It will be the engine of Africa's own rise. And the U.S.? Unless it changes, it will keep losing ground. Africa's $3 trillion economy is here. It has shattered U.S. dominance. It has broken free from colonial chains. And it has given Africa the power to rise as a true global superpower. The question is not whether Africa will rise. It already has. The real question is, can the United States survive Africa's rise? If you believe Africa is the future, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe. Because history is unfolding before our eyes. And together, we're going to witness the empire fall and a new Africa rise.